stand up.
We are only here to help you.
Zardoz is pleased.
George Lucas found his first film butchered before it even hit theaters. Executives literally laughed at David Bowie's best performance. Charlton Heston's Darkest Warning got banned in countries terrified of its message. And one film was so bizarre that critics called it career suicide for everyone involved. Forget box office bombs. These 70s sci-fi films were so controversial, they got locked away from audiences entirely. THX 1138, 1971. THX 1138 was George Lucas's debut feature. The film he made before Star Wars changed everything. But most people don't realize that studio executives hated it so much they tried to bury it completely. Set in a sterile underground future where humans are controlled by mandatory drugs and constant surveillance, the film follows a factory worker who commits the ultimate crime, feeling emotion and falling in love. Warner Brothers took one look at Lucas's stark, minimalist vision and panicked. They slashed 5 crucial minutes, destroying the film's pacing and gutting key scenes that explained the world's logic. When that wasn't enough, they buried it with minimal marketing and limited release. The film still managed to get banned in several conservative countries for its sexual content and anti-authority message. Lucas was devastated. He later said this experience was exactly why he fought so hard for creative control over Star Wars. What makes THX 1138 so haunting isn't just its clinical white environments or shaved heads, it's how accurately it predicted our modern obsession with pharmaceutical control and constant monitoring. The studio claimed THX was too intellectual for mainstream audiences, but what they really feared was its unflinching look at corporate control and dehumanization. The film's most chilling scene shows THX's mate being taken away for consumption, a euphemism for forced abortion that censors couldn't tolerate. Critics initially dismissed it as cold and emotionless, missing the entire point Lucas was making about humanity stripped of feeling. The movie's chase sequences, with faceless chrome robots pursuing THX through stark white corridors, became iconic despite the studio's efforts to suppress them. Robert Duvall's performance as the title character showed a man literally awakening from society's control, a theme that would appear repeatedly in science fiction for decades. Francis Ford Coppola, who produced it, called it the most important American film you've never seen. Today, it's recognized as the blueprint for dystopian sci-fi classics from Brazil to The Matrix, proving Lucas wasn't just the Star Wars guy. He had been warning us about surveillance states and pharmaceutical control long before they became reality.
Give me a kiss.
The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. While Americans were watching Star Wars, European audiences were experiencing something far stranger. Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth starred David Bowie as an alien who comes to Earth seeking water for his dying planet, only to become corrupted by human vices like alcohol, sex, and television. The British release kept Roeg's complete 139-minute cut with its explicit sex scenes and non-linear storytelling intact. But American distributors Cinema 5 were so confused by the film that they hacked out 20 minutes, removing crucial character development and making the already complex narrative nearly incomprehensible. Beyond the cuts, several countries banned it entirely for its explicit sexual content, including scenes where Bowie's alien reveals his true form while making love. Roeg refused to compromise his vision, saying, "The film is about a man who falls to Earth, not a man who falls into easy categorization." Critics were polarized, with Pauline Kael calling it too clever by half, while others recognized it as a masterpiece of alienation that only someone like Bowie could have embodied. Most directors would have picked a trained actor, not a rock star, to carry their ambitious sci-fi film. But Rogue insisted Bowie was perfect precisely because he already seemed otherworldly. David wasn't playing an alien, cinematographer Anthony Richmond later revealed. He was just being himself. The story follows Thomas Jerome Newton, an alien who uses his advanced technology to patent inventions that make him a tech billionaire overnight. His mission seems simple: make enough money to build a spacecraft to transport water back to his dying family. What he doesn't account for is how Earth's gravity, both physical and metaphorical, would trap him here. The film's production was nearly as strange as its plot. Shot across New Mexico's harshest landscapes, Bowie was deep in his cocaine addiction during filming, later admitting he barely remembered making the movie. "I was flying on so much coke," he confessed in a rare interview, "that sometimes I truly felt like I was from another planet." This personal disorientation translated perfectly on screen, with Bowie's gaunt, disconnected performance creating an uncanny portrait of alienation. By the time Newton is captured by government scientists who discover his true identity, viewers feel as trapped as he does. What truly disturbed censors wasn't just the explicit sex, though there was plenty, but the film's deep pessimism about human nature. Newton's descent from hopeful savior to broken alcoholic suggested that even beings from advanced civilizations would be corrupted by Earth's vices. The infamous elevator scene, where Newton and his lover Mary Lou, Candy Clark, engage in alien sex involving strange fluids and physiological transformations, was cut entirely from American releases. Clark later said, "They butchered the film because they couldn't handle showing an American girl making love with someone who wasn't human." The film's fractured, elliptical editing style, jumping across decades without warning, further alienated mainstream audiences. Rogue used over 1,500 cuts in the film, creating a disorienting visual collage that mirrored Newton's increasing disconnect from reality. When questioned about the film's deliberate obscurity, Rogue snapped at reporters, "If you want a film that explains everything, go watch a Disney movie." Perhaps most controversially, the film portrayed America not as a land of opportunity, but as a corporate prison. Newton's eventual fate, becoming a wealthy but broken man, releasing albums that contain coded messages to his home planet that no one will ever hear, struck many as an attack on the American dream itself. Several southern states banned the uncut version, with one Mississippi theater owner calling it anti-Christian propaganda disguised as science fiction. Despite the censorship, the film developed a devoted following that recognized its brilliance. Criterion's eventual restoration of Rogue's complete vision vindicated the director's approach. As critic Mark Kermode noted, "What was once considered obscene is now recognized as profound." Bowie himself, years later and sober, called it "the closest I'll ever come to playing myself on screen." The alien who fell to Earth had become one of cinema's most haunting portraits of isolation, and the very elements that got it banned made it immortal. Soylent Green, 1973. Soylent Green was the eco-horror that proved too prophetic for comfort. Released in 1973, it dared to show a future that censors and politicians didn't want audiences imagining. A world so polluted and overpopulated that the government's solution was more horrifying than the problem. While Americans saw a heavily edited version, multiple countries banned the film entirely, fearing its message would incite panic about environmental collapse and government corruption. Set in 2022 New York City with 40 million starving inhabitants, the film follows Detective Frank Thorne investigating a murder that leads to the truth behind the mysterious food product Soylent Green. Charlton Heston, fresh off Planet of the Apes and The Omega Man, brought mainstream credibility to what was essentially a B-movie premise. Director Richard Fleischer didn't pull punches. The opening montage showing Earth's destruction through industrialization was so disturbing that religious authorities in Spain and Italy claimed it contradicted biblical teachings about man's dominion over Earth. Both countries heavily censored the film. The film's most controversial elements weren't just its environmental message, but its casual acceptance of dystopian realities. Women referred to as furniture come with luxury apartments. The elderly are encouraged to commit suicide in government euthanasia centers with beautiful films of nature that no longer exists. These scenes were cut entirely in many territories, with the Vatican specifically condemning the film's promotion of suicide as liberation. Several South American governments banned it outright, claiming it promoted anti-authority sentiments. Then there's the infamous twist. Soylent Green is people. The revelation that the government's food solution is processed human remains. This cannibalism element got the film banned in the Philippines and several Asian markets, where censors deemed it morally repugnant regardless of context. The MPAA initially pushed for an X rating until the studio agreed to tone down the processor scene to secure an R. What most don't realize is that the film's production itself was haunted. Edward G. Robinson, playing Heston's elderly friend, was dying of cancer during filming. His euthanasia scene was his last performance. He died just 12 days after shooting wrapped. Heston later revealed that Robinson's real tears in that scene weren't acting. They were a dying man's farewell to his craft. This lent the film's most controversial sequence an eerie authenticity that disturbed even hardened critics. Environmentalists embraced the film despite its exploitation elements, recognizing its warnings about pollution and resource depletion. Corporate interests pushed back, with several food industry publications condemning it as dangerous fear-mongering. The film's marketing didn't help. Taglines like "People need it," "People die for it," only amplified concerns. Today, Soylent Green feels less like science fiction and more like dark prophecy. Its visions of climate crisis, wealth inequality, and food scarcity now seem less far-fetched. The film's final shot, Heston being carried away screaming the truth while officials dismiss him as insane, became a perfect metaphor for climate scientists whose warnings go unheeded. Ironically, the film's most banned element, its cannibalism revelation, has become so culturally embedded that it's now its least shocking aspect. The real horror lies in how much of its dystopian vision has edged toward reality. When a Silicon Valley meal replacement startup actually named itself Soylent in 2013, it seemed like final proof that the film's most disturbing predictions weren't just coming true, they were being embraced.
Zardoz! Zardoz is pleased.
Zardoz, 1974. Finally, there's the fever dream no one can explain. John Borman's Zardoz. Zardoz might be the strangest science fiction film ever released by a major studio. A psychedelic fever dream so bizarre that when it premiered in 1974, audiences walked out in confusion and disgust. John Borman had just delivered the smash hit Deliverance, so 20th Century Fox gave him carte blanche for his next project. What they got was Sean Connery in a red diaper, thigh-high boots, and bandoliers, flying around in a giant stone head that vomits guns. Even by 70s standards, this was extreme. Set in a post-apocalyptic 2293, the film presents a world divided between immortal Eternals living in isolation and brutal exterminators who worship a flying stone god called Zardoz. Connery plays Zed, an exterminator who infiltrates the Eternals' paradise, only to discover their immortality has led to boredom, impotence, and madness. When footage leaked showing the former James Bond in that infamous red outfit, Connery's career seemed doomed. He later admitted taking the role was a terrible mistake, but defended Borman's vision, saying, "At least it tried to say something, which is more than most films even attempt." The film was promptly restricted or outright banned in multiple territories, not just for its frontally nude scenes and sexual content, but for what censors called philosophically disturbing material. Borman's exploration of sexuality, mortality, and class warfare through hallucinatory imagery was simply too much. One notorious sequence showing the Eternals unable to achieve erection or orgasm while watching projections of sex acts was cut entirely from American releases. Critics savaged the film. Pauline Kael called it a special kind of mess, pretentious and incomprehensible. Roger Ebert was more charitable, noting it was completely daft, but so ambitious it's hard not to admire. The studio, horrified by early screenings, slashed the marketing budget and dumped it in limited release, effectively banning it from mainstream viewership. But Zardoz refused to die. College campuses began showing bootleg copies at midnight screenings. The film's surreal images and philosophical ambition found an audience among those who saw past its surface absurdity. Borman himself acknowledged the film's flaws, saying, "I bit off more than I could chew, but I'd rather choke on ambition than suffocate playing it safe." What makes Zardoz fascinating even today is how it tried to address questions most sci-fi films wouldn't touch. What happens when technology eliminates death? Does immortality lead to stagnation? Should the elites be allowed to isolate themselves from society's problems? Beneath the bizarre imagery and confused narrative was a genuine attempt to wrestle with humanity's future. Connery's involvement ultimately saved the film from complete obscurity. As his career rebounded years later, curious fans sought out his strangest role. Directors like Nicholas Winding Refn and Richard Kelly have cited Zardoz as a major influence, praising its fearless weirdness in an era of increasingly safe filmmaking. The film's most lasting legacy might be its final twist, the revelation that Zardoz comes from Wizard of Oz, with the Eternals being frauds hiding behind technology. This commentary on false gods and manipulation through spectacle was far ahead of its time. A studio executive allegedly said, "I don't understand a frame of this film, but I know we'll never make anything like it again." He was right. For better or worse, there will never be another Zardoz. These 4 films didn't just challenge audiences, they terrified the powers that be. Studios panicked, censors overreacted, and governments decided the public simply couldn't handle these visions of the future. But time has vindicated each one. THX-1138 exposed surveillance culture decades before Edward Snowden. Soylent Green predicted our environmental collapse with horrifying accuracy. The Man Who Fell to Earth showed us alienation through truly alien eyes. And Zardoz, in all its bizarre glory, dared to question immortality itself. What's most striking is how these banned and butchered films now seem almost prophetic. The sterile dystopia of THX-1138 looks increasingly like our medication-dependent society. Soylent Green's resource wars and corporate food control read like tomorrow's headlines. While mainstream sci-fi gave us laser guns and space battles, these controversial classics forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about where humanity might be headed. That's why they've survived decades of suppression to find their audiences. If you enjoyed digging into these controversial classics with me, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the films that changed everything, especially the ones they tried to keep you from seeing.